wandering in the
on the gods of Egypt.
confusion. The wilderness has boxed them in.
Yahweh made it very clear that he was putting a literal smackdown on the gods of Egypt. Exodus 12:12, for I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. Do you think it was likely that God was telling Moses, tonight I'm going to go through and bust up all of these inanimate blocks of wood and stone? What would be the point? What do you think was it that gave the magicians of Pharaoh the power to turn their staffs into snakes? There were supernatural entities working for them. They're gods. And God said, tonight, when I go through the land, I will execute judgment on all of their gods. Now think about that. Think about all of the stuff that we hear about Egyptian gods. Our daughter learned about the Egyptian gods in mythology in school and thought it was so cool. Oh, Osiris and Horus and Isis and Ra and all of, oh, this is so cool. Yahweh kicked their tails. Now look at Exodus 14, and this part was the one that really got me, and I thought this was really, really awesome. Exodus 14. I had never heard this talked about in a study of the Red Sea crossing. Tell the people of Israel, God tells Moses, to turn back, and encamp in front of Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baalzephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea. Now, this begs a few questions. First of all, imagine being the last guy in the Israelite column, and you're looking back over your shoulder at the clouds of dust coming up from the chariot wheels, from the Egyptian army, the baddest military in the ancient Near East, and the word comes from the front of the column. Yahweh said, what? We got to turn around? Because that's what that phrase means. Turn back, turn around. Turn around. I want you to go to this specific place, and you're going to camp all night. And I want you to camp facing Baalzephon. Now, what is Baalzephon? Why did God tell them to camp facing Baalzephon? And what was Baal doing in Egypt? Baal was a Canaanite god, right? He was the king of their pantheon. El was the partly retired, chief god who just sort of let Baal do what he wanted. Baal was the king of the gods, a storm god. Oh, like Yahweh. Coincidence? But, and this is where the archaeologists and the historians know stuff that we should know in church. For a period of a couple hundred years called the Second Intermediate Period in Egyptian history, roughly 1750 to about 1550 BC, a group of Semitics called the Hyksos. The Hyksos ruled northern Egypt. Now this is a Hellenized or a Greek form of words that in Egypt or Egyptian meant rulers of foreign lands. They moved into the Nile Delta, northern Egypt, which for odd reasons is actually called Lower Egypt. That's because the Nile flows that way, yeah. They took over, they settled in a city called Avaris, and they worshipped Baal. They brought their architecture with them, they brought their pottery with them, and they brought their god with them. Baal was the chief god of northern Egypt for about 400 years. Now this blew my mind finding out that there were Semitic people, possibly cousins, Canaanite anyway, in Egypt at the time of the sojourn, while the Israelites were in Egypt. In fact, during this period of history, there was an Egyptian king, a pharaoh, whose name was Jacob. Did you know that? Jacob. Technically, on his little scarab, it was Jacob Har meaning mountain, Jacob of the mountain. Probably not that Jacob, but the point is there were Semitic people who controlled northern Egypt during this period. Now, we don't know if the Hyksos were still there when the Israelites left during the Exodus, but we know that they came, they brought their god, and their god stayed there for a long time. Also, and this is really interesting, Baal was identified with the Egyptian god Set, or Seth. Now, Set, we know today, or we think of him today, as the evil Egyptian god who got the drop on his brother Osiris and cut him up into 14 pieces. But he wasn't always a bad guy in the Egyptian pantheon. In the early days, Set was actually the assistant to the sun god Ra. He got up there on the solar boat every night before it went over the horizon because the evil serpent Apep was going to eat the solar boat if Set didn't stab him first. But later in Egyptian history, because Set was the god of storms, he was the god of the desert, he was the god of foreigners, and later in Egyptian history, after they'd been conquered by the Nubians and the Assyrians and the Persians, all within about 200 years, the god of the foreigners wasn't quite as welcome around the pyramids, if you know what I mean. But he was identified as one and the same as Baal. Baal, Set, same god. And his worship continued in northern Egypt for at least 400 years. And we know this because there was a stela set up by Ramses II, Ramses the Great. You know, Yul Brynner. He set up this stela on the 400th anniversary of Set doing something. We're not sure what it was, but it's possible that if it's pointing back 400 years from the reign of Ramses the Great, it was around the year 1750 BC. So it could mark 400 years from the arrival in Egypt of the god Baal/Set. Just at the time the house of Israel shows up and settles there. Coincidence? Coincidence? No. I don't know about you, I'm not a coincidence theorist. No, I don't use that, no. Conspiracies, yes. Coincidences, no. And when Yahweh brings the Israelites out of Egypt, he orders them specifically to turn around and camp all night facing a place sacred to Baal Set, this place Baalzephon, specifically so they could cross there. Did I mention that 500 miles north of the Nile Delta was a mountain called Mount Zephon? Any guess as to whose sacred mountain that was? Baal? Coincidence? No. This was a supernatural smackdown. Think about it. Yahweh said, turn around. I know you've got the baddest army in the Middle East coming after you. Don't worry. The angel of Yahweh, who by the way is what we Christians would call Jesus, will stand between you and them all night to protect you from them. But you're going to camp all night facing this place that's sacred to Baal and named for his holy mountain that's 500 miles away. Baal was the god of maritime navigation. In the Canaanite pantheon, the Canaanite mythology, Baal defeated the god Yam, who was the chaos god of the ocean. So Baal was the master of the sea, the master of the ocean, the master of maritime navigation. And Yahweh says, watch this. Wall of water on the right, wall of water on the left, Israelites walk through. This was a called shot like Babe Ruth in the 1935 World Series. Next one's over the center field fence. Baal, chief god of Canaan, that's my holy land, and my people are coming, and we're going to take it. And then just to put the cherry on the cake, all the Baal worshipers, Pharaoh's army, rush into the cut. Wall of water on the right, wall of water on the left. Our God's the master of the sea. He's got this. Boom. If there had been microphones in the 15th century BC, that's the moment where Yahweh would have just dropped the microphone on the stage. Boom. And walked off, because that was epic.
So the whole reason they turned around at Baalzephon was because Baalzephon had to do with Baal. And we've studied the Egyptian pharaohs, and we found that there were foreign pharaohs called the Hyksos that were actually pharaohs that came from the land of Canaan. And from the land of Canaan, it looks like they brought their god Baal with them. And so it just happens to be that on the same period of time when people were walking out, the Israelites were walking out on their Exodus, that was the same time that they were actually celebrating this celebration to mark how many years Baal had actually been in Egypt. So at the same time, they go and they actually face opposing Baalzephon. And keep in mind, they're going into the land of Canaan. And in the land of Canaan, Baal is the chief god. When you look at it, with the way the waters opened, it's almost like a birthing canal. They were actually being birthed into the land of Canaan.
For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against